Hi guys, welcome back to Scale Motor. I understand it's been a bit of a long stint since my last video. I'll get into that another time, but we're going to be jumping in with another build. It's the Tamiya Ducati 916 Senna. We're going to be using the Blue Stuff trans kit. Comes with some cool photo etch, some resin, some decals. It's really cool. The paint we are using is going to be ProScale Ducati. I can't say that word. I'm not Italian. I'm not going to try. It looks like a really good kit though. I've been wanting to build it for a while. To be fair, it's been in my stash for a bit, and so is the trans kit. Just having a quick look through the bags. There's quite a few pieces, not overly complicated, but I'm the kind of person who will make it complicated, and I'll probably end up scratch building something or 3D printing at least one thing. We'll see as we go along. Maybe some different wheels. I want to try maybe carbon wheels. We'll see. I wanted to try something else on this build, which I'll get into later in the video as well. So first up, we are cutting off any pieces of bodywork from the sprue, any fairing pieces, any parts which are going to be body coloured, any parts which we're going to carbon. We're not going to bother cutting off and doing the wing mirrors yet. We'll do that at a later date. The nose cone had some weird seam lines, which we are going to have to deal with. There's one on each side and it goes down the side and underneath. And the seat unit slash tank, which is all one piece, has got a line down the middle, which we are going to have to deal with. Just to try and get the best fit possible, we went in and sanded the mating surfaces on both sides of the seat unit slash tank part, just so they'd fit as close as they possibly could. This just helps kind of eliminate any filling and sanding we might have to do later. There were bits of flash as well, as you can see, which we had to deal with, just going in with any old scalpel just to get rid of that flash. And it's the little bits like this which I think kind of you'll notice more towards the end, but they do make that little bit of difference. So to stick, we are just going to be using Tamiya Extra Thin. We're just going to be running this all along the seam. We want to try and get not as much as possible, just enough really. It's kind of hard to gauge, but we are going to be putting it all along, just so when we do put both pieces together, the extra thin cement starts to kind of melt the plastic together. We're also going to put a bit of the Tamiya Extra Thin on the inside of the seam, just so the capillary action takes the glue into the seam, and then when we push it together and add a bit of tape just to hold it together, the kind of plastic will melt and it'll cause a nice seam, like a bead of plastic, which we can then use essentially just to fill the gap. The front hugger got the same treatment, just a little bit of the Tamiya Extra Thin cement on, then pop the pieces together, run a bit more of that extra thin cement up the seam on the back side, give it a push together, and you'll see that kind of bead of plastic ooze out of the seam. That bead of plastic may look scary, but at the moment it's what we want. That'll minimise any sanding and filling we need to do later, which is quite boring. Speaking of boring parts, seam lines or mould lines, whatever you want to call them. How I like to deal with them is just get a pen, any pen. Well, not any pen, it's not going to work with a biro. Maybe a Posca or a Sharpie, and just draw over the seam lines. This will help you both see where they are, and it'll help you later on down the line when you come to sand the seam lines off. I like to come in with, I don't know what grit this is, I can't remember, but it's quite fine, just because I didn't want to kind of put loads of scratches in. But what we want to do is sand until we can see no more ink left from the pen. As you can see here, no more ink, and the seam line is dealt with, and then you just got to move on to the other side and do it all again. Excellent. Then here's the kind of front hugger. You can see that bead of plastic going up the middle. This is free filler, basically. We just got to sand that. I don't know again what grit this is, but it is my favourite sander. As you can see, it's well used and abused. After that, we're going to come in with a UMP buffer. You can use the blue side, then the white side, till you start hearing squeaking, and it looks like brand new plastic. It doesn't have to be brand new plastic, it doesn't have to be super shiny, that, you know, it's just because I can, really. it really doesn't matter if you're using a thick primer. It's going to fill all those kind of little tiny scratches, and you'll be able to see anyway once the primer's on. And speaking of sanding, more sanding was needed here. Got that bead of plastic to get rid of, much like the front hugger. It's not a fun thing to sand this because there's loads of little like raised bits and weird corners. Just make sure you're careful on the edges and around kind of that raised lip around the fuel cap. You just want to take your time, really. But yeah, we hit it with that, and then the same UMP buffer, and you can see we got a much nicer finish than we did before. Next up, we were just removing the kind of screw gate points from the fairings. Some of these kits have them in such annoying places, but then same, sanding. I don't mind sanding this kind of stuff because it's normally quick and easy. You just come in with a kind of coarse sander, and then again hit it with the UMP buffer, and then we got some nice smooth curves. Just be careful to not kind of over sand the curves because you'll ruin the shape and you can see bits. And remember earlier when I said cut off all the bits which are going to be body colour? Yeah, I didn't. I forgot this part, so we're just sticking it on now. This again, Tamiya extra thin, push, squeeze, get a little bead of plastic, and then we can come in and sand that bead of plastic away, and hopefully it'll act as free filler. With all the parts ready for paint, they were mounted to cocktail sticks or crocodile clip stick things. We've got there's even a micro brush which has been cut up in the back and glued on, just a dab of super glue in an inconspicuous area. And then we're going to use Mr. Finishing Surfacer 1500 grey. Not sure why I went with grey. Black probably would have been better under a slightly metallic colour, but it's shot through a UMP Apex airbrush. About maybe 15 to 18 psi. I'm not too sure. It was just on what it was on. It's thinned with Mr. Colour Rapid Thinner because I don't need it to self-level that much really. I'm impatient. I wanted it to dry really quickly so I could just get on with painting, to be fair. I don't like the waiting around part of the hobby, as you've probably noticed by all the shortcuts and stuff I'm taking. But yeah, you can see the sanding from earlier paid off quite well. We can just about see that seam line. I'm not too bothered by it, but the seam line on the front has gone, and I'm quite happy with how that kit turned out, to be fair. Seam line on this is still there, but I wasn't bothered too much because we're going to be carbon fibre decaling it. Next up is the ProScale paints. This stuff doesn't need to be thinned. Again, the airbrush, the compressor was on what it was on, 15 to 18 psi maybe. I'm just going to slowly build it up because it can be quite a hot paint, as can all these kind of pre-thinned lacquers. Probably done about 8 thin coats, and then we got to where we were there. My kind of rule of thumb is just keep going, and when you're happy, stop, to be fair. You can put more on, you can put less on. Just kind of when you're happy, stop. I was happy, and this is how it looks. Yeah, quite happy with that. By when you're happy, stop, I mean don't think, maybe another coat. Just if it looks good, stop. Next, we're just masking the top half of the fairing off. Looking back, this was a bit of a silly move, to be fair. I mean, with hindsight, it was a silly move. Currently, in my mind, in that video where you're seeing me now, it wasn't a silly move. So we're just going to mask the top off because the bottom of these fairings need to be painted black. So it was masked now to paint black. My thought process was, I'll paint it black, and then I'll mask the bottom off and 2K, and then we're good to go. But then I thought, well, I don't really want to mask and then 2K, because knowing my luck, I'll go to pull the masking tape off and the 2K will come with it. And not only the 2K, but the decals and the paint, and I overthought it. But I mean, I guess the demarcation turned out okay. You can see we've got a nice clean line on both parts. I guess it's just practice for later on, but I have to do this again. Speaking of doing this again, I'd like to do this again. I didn't do a very good job of this, but I was just making a template here for the carbon fibre decals. Thought I'd do one side first, easy to do, pop the tape on, cut it to shape. I like to do half, then cut that out of the decal sheet, and then flip the decal sheet over, turn the stencil 90 degrees and cut again. Might seem a little silly and around the houses, but it's for good reason, because you end up with a nice kind of seam up the middle and the V-shaped carbon, like so. The centre part of the belly pan, I suppose, was treated with the same, except I just done the whole thing, measured it, cut it in half, popped it on one side, turned it 90 degrees, popped it on the other side. As you can see, we got all the parts ready for decaling. Carbon fibre decals, same as any decals really, dip them in some nice warm water, wait for the kind of adhesive to soften, wet the part, then just transfer the decal over to the part. I kind of like to move it around with my fingers, make sure your fingers are wet, get it in place, and then we can get our decal solution. I went straight in with the strong because I know the Scale Motorsport decals can handle it. I did later go on to the extra strong, and then we also used a bit of heat. The heat kind of shrinks the decal slightly, so it kind of conforms more, and then we're just going to use our brush to tease out the seams. The decals from the Blue Stuff set had the same treatment really, except I slid them off the backing paper rather than using my fingers, just because they're a little bit thinner and I wasn't certain how well they'd work with my fingers. I like to use a cotton bud for the smaller decals because the brush can brush it off and you'll end up losing it. There weren't too many decals on this scheme, to be fair, and none of them were really over complex areas, so we didn't really have much of an issue. But from the carbon decals, they were a little bit complex, but you can see we're all decaled and ready for clear coat. So this is where I'd normally get out my 2K and start mixing, and I did. I got my 2K out, started mixing, and as I was mixing, I noticed that the mix was quite cloudy. I don't know if it's because I haven't used this 2K in quite a while, or if my mixing cup just wasn't really as clean as it should be, but it got cloudy, and I took this as a sign to do something I've been thinking of for quite a while, and I want to move away from 2K. I don't find it fun. So instead, we went with the GX112, mainly because it was the only lacquer I had on my shelf. And I'm just going to leave the paint go in the background while I explain my thought process behind wanting to move away from the 2K, to be fair. I just want to build stuff, and the 2K, because I'm not the greatest of painters, I always end up having to do a lot of sanding, 12,000, then polishing, and I've got to wait ages for it to set, and yeah, it was just kind of sucking bits of fun out of it for me, and I just wanted to push ahead, and I'd get overexcited, do it too early, and I'd ruin it. So I've wanted to just find a better way. It may not be better in your eyes, but a better way for me. So I decided I'd go with a lacquer rather than just a 2K. And I found a method online I thought I'd try. So what I've done is I've got the PSI down really pretty low, to be fair. I think I was probably about 7, and I've thinned the paint about 80 to 90%, and I just built it up really, really slow just to get it nice and smooth, I guess. And it looks like it's paying off. I started off with some really thin layers, and then towards the end, I as you can see, I laid it on quite thick, and it looked a bit wet. When it was drying, as you can see here, it did look pretty shiny, so I was quite happy with how it turned out. Ignore the kind of roughness on the black bit, because the black bit's going to get painted over. So now I really cut out the sanding step. I thought I don't mind doing a bit of polish, a little bit of compound, a little bit of polish. So we're going to be using the UMP compound. Just dabbed a bit on it, dried in the tub because it was quite old, but a bit of water kind of reactivates it. So we put a bit on, a bit of a cut-up t-shirt, because don't really need microfiber. Cut-up t-shirt is just fine. So a bit of water, a bit of compound, rub it in. I go one direction and then buff it off, and then come back in with the polish, exactly the same. Don't really need water for this. It's quite a watery polish, but it works really, really well. But yeah, just one direction and then buff it off with the same piece of t-shirt, and you can see we got a nice shine, to be fair, and I'm happy with that result. It looks good to me. That's kind of all that matters. I'd be intrigued to know if you think it looks good. The front hugger had the same treatment. You can see a nice side-by-side of before and after, and the same for the side fairing there. So yeah, I'm quite happy with that. We come to masking again. So we masked off the top part and we put a bit of masking tape along the sides and stuff because we wanted to paint the back. Mr. Finishing Surface of 1500 black, thinned with Mr. Rapid thinner again. I turned the airbrush up by this point just because it's a slightly thicker paint and it's not thinned as much. And then I come to the fun part after painting the back of taking the masking tape off. Always my favourite part. And there we've got a nice demarcation, and you can see the difference, and the back came out pretty well too. And here's everything. Quite happy with how it turned out, to be fair. I'm quite pleased with the Mr. GX112, whatever it was, the lacquer clear coat. It does the job for me. It looks fine, it's nice and shiny, it's in scale. I wouldn't have polished it, but it did haze up a bit while it was drying. Not my greatest work, I will admit, but I enjoyed it nonetheless. It's good to be back. I'm enjoying being back in the hobby room building, and I'm looking forward to finishing off this build. If you guys are still here, thanks for sticking around. It's my first video of probably, I think it's like a year or something, at least. Like I said, I've had a lot going on, but we'll cross that bridge another time. Thank you guys so much for watching. Have a great day, and I'll catch you next time.